As well, Governor, there's one Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's the deputy press secretary. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm guessing you're not going to answer it, and I want to follow up. So my question is, will she be drop the deputy and become the next press secretary?
I don't know, and by the way, she doesn't either. She really likes Sean Spicer, loves working with him, respects him a lot, and that's not her decision to make.
So let me follow up with a question. Would you want that for her? It's a very tough job.
It's a tough job. Look, I think my daughter's up to anything. She's great at what she does. I'm proud of her. She's a tough cookie, and don't ever underestimate a Southern woman, because when she starts the sentence with "bless your heart," she's about to cut into you like a deer.
Take your throat out.
They'll call us still magnolias for nothing,
that's right? I'm telling you.
All right, James, here's one for you. What would you advise President Trump to tweet moving forward around this issue of the Russia probe?
I think he should tweet about no topics that are currently under investigation. So I think he should tweet about Arnold Schwarzenegger's ratings. I think if he wants to tweet about Rosie O'Donnell, that's great.
Fun stuff.
About hunting with nudes,
the specialist?
Yeah,
right,
specialist. Ideally the specialist. That's what he ought to be tweeting about.
Good.
Nothing else.
Thank you to our Fox News specialists today, Governor Mike Huckabee and James Freeman. And we thank you all for watching. Make sure to follow us on social media at Specialist FNC on Twitter and Facebook. Remember, 5 o'clock will never be the same. Special Report is next. Take it away, Bret.
The national pastime in the nation's capital one night after what could have been a national tragedy. This is Special Report. Good evening. I'm John Robertson for Bret Baier tonight. We are about an hour away from the first pitch in what is normally a low-key annual charity baseball game between Republicans and Democrats in Congress. But this year's edition is anything but normal. The number 3 Republican in the House, Steve Scalise, remains in critical condition after being shot yesterday during a morning practice session in Virginia. A lobbyist who was shot has been upgraded from critical to serious condition. And we are learning more tonight about the shooter who was killed by police and his troubled life. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Mike Emanuel's on Capitol Hill, where both parties are vowing to dial down the poisonous partisanship that many blame for a toxic political atmosphere. Peter Ducey is at Nationals Park, where players and fans are gathering right now. Doug McElway at MedStar Washington Hospital Center with an update on the victims' conditions. But we start off tonight with our Chief Intelligence Correspondent, Catherine Herridge, and the latest on the investigation. Good evening, Catherine.
John, tonight the FBI says there is no evidence to suggest the weapons, a 9mm handgun and a rifle, were bought illegally, as we hear from the suspect for the first time in his own words.
The 99% are getting pushed around, and the 1% are just not giving a.
That's James Hodgkinson, 6 years ago at an Occupy protest in St. Louis. The FBI issued this poster seeking any information about the suspect before he opened fire on Republican lawmakers at a Virginia ball field.
It was a high-powered rifle, and I thought, good grief, there's houses over there.
Hodgkinson's neighbor in Belleville, Illinois, says he witnessed a strange incident in March when the 66-year-old opened fire in their backyards.
I yelled at him. I said, hey, stop shooting over there. There's houses over there and everything. And I didn't get any kind of a notion from him that he heard me or that he even cared.
The sheriff said he was called to the scene and counseled Hodgkinson, who had a valid firearms license.
We just made sure that, he knew about the safety risks, and there is homes around here, and that we wanted to make sure that he understood all that. And once he did, he stopped.
After that run-in, the FBI believes Hodgkinson made his way to Virginia.
Law enforcement has reason to believe that the shooter has been in Alexandria, Virginia area since March of this year.
After searching the suspect's white van parked near the ball field, agents recovered his phone, computer, and a camera. Investigators are hopeful the digital forensic trail will reveal whether the shooting was premeditated or opportunistic.
We are looking to glean what we can from the contents regarding his electrical devices that he owned.
Investigators remain in Alexandria, where the baseball diamond and immediate area are a crime scene. Agents are working on the ballistics evidence and investigating the trajectory of the shots. Law enforcement officials say the investigation is proceeding on multiple fronts. First, whether Hodgkinson had any help in planning or executing the attack. At this point, they are leaning towards the conclusion that Hodgkinson acted on his own, John.
A lot of questions unanswered. Catherine, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
The calls for unity in the wake of the shooting continue on Capitol Hill and all around Washington. But how long will the political ceasefire last? Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is at the Capitol Hill Club tonight, where a pregame bipartisan reception is underway. Mike?
Forgive us also when we seem to forget that words matter.
A reminder today from the House chaplain for all to strike a more peaceful tone.
It's more important than ever to help each other, care for each other, and remind each other that we are all united by our love of our great and beautiful country.
The House unanimously adopted a resolution honoring those wounded yesterday and saluted the performance of Capitol Police and first responders. House Republican Whip Steve Scalise is very popular with both Democrats and Republicans, and today there were more expressions of concern for him.
When we hear the word critical attached to his condition, it sends shivers down our spines. We hope and pray for a quick and full recovery.
There's also the fear nasty rhetoric could jeopardize the health of the nation.
The country is fraying at the edges, and we've got to pull the country back together.
After the attack, the issue of security going forward is on their minds, particularly when multiple members of Congress are at an event away from the Capitol.
I have suggested they need a bigger budget, because right now they have a perimeter that they cover, and these parks were outside the perimeter.
The key is to make sure that there's security there who perhaps can stop the second, third, or fourth shot before innocent bystanders get killed, as was the case with Gabby Giffords.
My wife and I will drive around the state, as we always do, talking to people of Wyoming, and I'm not looking for additional protection at all.
And with the congressional baseball charity game tonight, perhaps there's an opportunity for a new spirit in politics to prevail.
I hope there's going to be a lot of unity before a game and after the game that we can apply to what we do around here.
In the Senate, an issue that divides, there are suggestions Republican leaders are getting closer on health care reform, hoping to have a bill in form next week.
We're committed to helping Americans trapped on the Obamacare exchanges. We're committed to addressing Obamacare's skyrocketing premium increases. We're committed to preserving access to care for Americans with pre-existing conditions.
Scrapping Obamacare may jeopardize that spirit of unity, with Democrats already complaining about the process. But at the reception behind me, folks from both parties seem to be having a good time together. John?
They're all making nice, at least for now. Mike, thanks so much. Earlier today, President Trump said Steve Scalise is, quote, in some trouble, but will hopefully be okay. Let's check in now on the congressman's condition and that of one of the other victims. Correspondent Doug McKelway is at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center tonight. Hi, Doug.
Hi, John. Information from officials here at the MedStar Hospital continues to be extremely sparse. The last full update we got on Steve Scalise's condition came at 8:15 last night, with the one exception of a one-word text I just received from the PIO here confirming that Steve Scalise did undergo his third surgery today. Our producer on Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, tells us from non-hospital sources that Steve Scalise's wound is, quote, complicated. Doctors are evaluating his condition in 12-hour increments. They say the bullet shattered his pelvis, creating a host of internal issues, foremost of which is bleeding. So altogether, we've got a shattered pelvis, damage to internal organs, as well as to veins and to arteries. President Trump, who along with First Lady Melania visited the Scalise family at the hospital last night, today spoke about the Majority Whip's condition.
It's been much more difficult than people even thought at the time. It's been, he's in some trouble, but he's a great fighter, and he's going to be okay, we hope.
Vice President Pence and his wife Karen visited the hospital this morning, where they thanked doctors and staff. Meanwhile, Matt Micah, the former Capitol Hill staffer, now Tyson's food lobbyist, who was struck multiple times, George Washington University Hospital reports today that he has now been upgraded to serious condition. He will undergo more surgery tomorrow, and the hospital says that that is the last word they will have about him to protect his privacy. On a brighter note, Zach Barth, the aide to Congressman Roger Williams, who was struck through the left calf, was remarkably back at work at the United States Capitol today. He described how he tried to stay alive when he heard those first shots.
He hits me in my leg, and at that point, you know, my adrenaline is pumping, and my fight or flight reflexes, they take control, and I decide if I want to live, I need to get to better cover.
Meanwhile, the two Capitol Hill police officers, Miss Griner, Crystal Griner, and David Bailey, are going to be absolutely fine. Griner is now recovering here, expected to make a full recovery from a gunshot wound to the lower leg. That's it from here. John, back to you.
Doug McElway for us tonight. Doug, thanks. Let's talk more about tonight's game and the current political environment. Republican Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama is a member of the GOP baseball team who gave aid to Congressman Scalise after he was shot. Congressman Mike Doyle of Alabama is the manager of the Democratic squad. I spoke with them earlier today and started off asking Representative Brooks whether he initially realized just how gravely Congressman Scalise was wounded.
I knew it was serious. Steve was losing communication ability. He was still conscious, and I'm no MD, but it looked like he was going into what I would call shock. Anytime you have a bullet coming in that doesn't come out in the hip area, there are all sorts of things that could go wrong. My hope at the time was that it hit the muscle tissue, perhaps stopped at the bone, but apparently it did much more damage than that.
Yeah, we understand, Congressman, that it looks like it's going to be a much longer road home for Congressman Scalise than initially believed. So certainly our prayers are with him. Congressman Doyle, yesterday after the shooting, Congressman Davis, who was there, said that we need to ratchet down the political rhetoric, that what we're seeing out there, according to him, is, quote, political rhetorical terrorism, and that it has to stop. Do you believe, Congressman Doyle, we're at an inflection point here in terms of the language, in terms of the political atmosphere, the environment?
I hope so. I guess time will tell. I think all of us need to reflect on our own personal behavior and how we interact with one another. You know, we have disagreements and differences of philosophy, and the Founding Fathers wanted a vigorous debate, but there's no reason that debate shouldn't be a civil debate, and that the way we talk to one another and talk about one another should be civil too. And by all means, nobody should ever advocate hatred and violence. I think both of our parties and our members here condemn that.
Congressman Doyle, I know you issued an invitation to the Republican team to join you for dinner last night, and unfortunately they already had a dinner planned, but you said of that invitation, quote, maybe if the leadership is civil to each other, the American people can be too. Congressman Brooks, do you believe there's an opportunity here to lead by example?
I sure hope so. No question that the rhetoric has been heated. It probably began to some degree with the election of Barack Obama. It certainly has intensified with the election of Donald Trump. The vitriol is at levels I've never seen before.
Congressman Doyle, I heard it time and time again yesterday as people were describing what happened yesterday in Virginia, and that is, what is going on in America? So let me ask you, what is going on in America?
Well, I think that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. You know, the way we communicate has changed dramatically since many of us were first elected to office. The technology, the social media, the ability to have communication without looking at one another in the face anonymously has empowered some people, I believe, to speak at a much ruder and coarser level. And I think we all have a responsibility, not just members of Congress, but the public, too. People tell us they want us to be bipartisan, but sometimes our constituents don't act very bipartisan. So I think we all have a responsibility to take a look in the mirror and ask ourselves how we can improve ourselves first.
Well, let me ask you this, Congressman Brooks. What do you hope is achieved by tonight's baseball game? And Congressman Doyle, will get you to weigh in on that, too.
Well, I hope that we're able to work together in a bipartisan spirit, have some friendly competition. This is a little bit as an aside, but I hope the FBI will release my baseball glove so I can catch it, something in the outfield. For whatever reason that I can't fathom, they haven't released my baseball glove yet. I don't know what's wrong with it. But I hope we have a big attendance tonight. I hope we raise, we've already raised, what, $600,000 for charity, and I hope we have a new record there. And certainly with the attendance, it looks like we're going to have a new record. And with that, we can help a lot of disadvantaged children in the Washington, D.C. area.
Congressman Doyle. Doyle?
I just want to assure Mo that Democrats had nothing to do with impounding their baseball gloves. And we'd be glad to loan them ours when they're in the field.
Will it work? Is it a left-handed glove or a right-handed glove?
But it's going to be a great game. It's always great competition. I told Joe Barton, the Republican manager, that I love him before the game, and I'm going to love him after the game. But during the game, I'm from Pittsburgh. We play to win. And we're going to give the folks a good competition. And afterwards, we're going to crack open a couple bottles of beer and just have a little bit of fun.
Sounds good. Let me ask you this question as we close. We've had inflection points in this country before. Don't need to name them. But the unity that was precipitated out of those inflection points has never lasted. And if anything, the rancor between the two sides only seems to get worse. Can we make it last this time, or is it destined to fade?
Well, I think we all, like I said, we all have a responsibility in that. The media has a responsibility to showcase people that are doing positive things and working together in a bipartisan way. I know that's not very exciting and it might not be good for the ratings, but you know, I think we all need to think about how we can do better. And it's members of Congress, it's the public, it's the media, it's everybody. Let's all take a look in the mirror and see how we can improve ourselves.
Congressman Brooks, can we make it last?
I hope so, but we're in an environment right now where you have some very, very serious disagreements about what kind of country we want America to be. I think this is a fork in the road, and time will tell which direction the American people want us to go. Hopefully they will learn public policy, they'll make wise decisions, and that's the best way to bring us together, is for the American people to coalesce on the kind of country they want America to be.
Well, at least the two sides will be together on the ball field tonight in what we hope will be a friendly but very exciting game. Congressman Brooks, Congressman Doyle, thanks for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks a
Well,
lot.
in a sign that the political environment has not changed a whole lot, Georgia Republican congressional candidate Karen Handel says packages containing threatening letters and a suspicious substance were sent to her home and to her neighbors. Handel says her street was being blocked off while law enforcement investigates. Handel is running against Democrat John Ossoff in Tuesday's special election for the 6th congressional district. The father of an American student who has returned home from North Korea in what doctors call a state of unresponsive wakefulness says the communist regime is lying about his son. And on that point, he appears to get some backup from doctors. The dad is also suggesting former President Obama should have done more to help. Correspondent Ellison Barber has that story from Cincinnati tonight.
Doctors at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center say Otto Warmbier is suffering from a severe neurological injury after he was returned to the U.S. from North Korea in a state of unresponsive wakefulness.
He has spontaneous eye opening and blinking. However, he shows no signs of understanding language, responding to verbal commands, or awareness of his surroundings. We have no certain or verifiable knowledge of the cause or circumstances of his neurological injury.
This is where he grew up, in Wyoming, Ohio. All of these ribbons are for him. And this is where Warmbier went to high school. It's also where his father stood in front of a podium in the same jacket his son wore in March of 2016 when he was sentenced to 15 years of prison in North Korea.
We're thrilled that our son is on American soil. We're in the school that he thrived in, and I'm able to talk to you on Otto's behalf, and I'm able to wear the jacket.
Warmbier landed late Tuesday night in ambulance, and his family met him on the tarmac and took him to a Cincinnati hospital.
I knelt down by his side and I hugged him, and I told him I missed him, and I was so glad that he made it home.
Otto Warmbier traveled to North Korea in January of 2016. Police detained him at the airport in Pyongyang after he allegedly stole a propaganda poster from his hotel. North Korea says Warmbier slipped into a coma a year ago. A U.S. official tells Fox News the North Koreans claim he contracted botulism first. The Warmbier family doesn't believe it.
Even if you believe their explanation of botulism and a sleeping pill causing the coma, and we don't, there is no excuse for any civilized nation to have kept his condition secret and denied him top-notch medical care for so long.
Doctors say Warmbier suffered extensive loss of brain tissue, but again, no word on the cause. Out of respect for the family, they would not comment on his prognosis or future treatments. John?
Ellison, thank you. The State Department says the U.S. envoy who traveled to North Korea to bring Otto Warmbier home also made contact with 3 other Americans detained there. The administration is not commenting on the medical conditions of those prisoners. A spokeswoman says the U.S. hopes the other Americans will be able to return home soon. When we come back, we will go live to Nationals Park here in Washington, where they are getting ready for tonight's congressional ball. An hour away from the scheduled start of the congressional baseball game, President Trump will not attend in person tonight, but he has recorded a video message that will be played. Correspondent Peter Ducey is live tonight at the stadium, where they are about to play ball, despite yesterday's shooting. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, John. For the last 4 hours or so, the security here inside and outside Nationals Park has been about as tight as any event that you'll ever see in Washington, D.C. The street right in front of the park behind center plate is lined right now with U.S. Capitol Police K-9 vehicles. The D.C. Metro Police Department out in full force tonight as well. The heavy security, one reminder of what happened at yesterday's practice to the Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise. And so is all the LSU colored gear that we're seeing on players from both teams in his honor.
I personally didn't think you'd ever see a graduate of Texas A&M wearing an LSU shirt, but special times. So everybody that can get an LSU shirt's wearing one for Steve.
And we're all rooting for Steve and for him to recover. And this is a game he brings a lot of intensity and passion to. And so we're with him tonight. And we wish he were here, but we wish him a speedy recovery.
The attendance for this year's game has risen dramatically in the last day. More than 20,000 tickets sold to people who want to watch the Democratic lawmakers play the Republican lawmakers. And this is the 108th year of this game, so organizers know how many people to expect. But this attendance number is so much higher than predicted. They had to ask the Nationals to open up more seating, which they did. The extra attention on this game also means a lot of extra money for the charities it supports, including the Boys and Girls Clubs of Washington, the Washington Literacy Council, the Washington Nationals Dream Foundation, and for the first time, following heroic actions by the Capitol Police, credited with saving dozens of congressmen, the Capitol Police Memorial Foundations. Corporate donors have stepped up in a big way in the last 24 hours. More than $1 million has been raised around this event, John. That's more than double what they took in last year.
That's terrific, Peter. Should be a great night there tonight. The Trump administration is adding 3 senior members of the Islamic State group to a terrorism blacklist. Included are the ISIS leader and chief recruiter in India and a recruiter for those who carried out 2 deadly attacks in Europe. Also today, the Senate passed new sanctions on Russia for interfering in last fall's election and on Iran for its ballistic missile program. This is a Fox News alert. President Trump is reversing another Obama-era move with a new Get Tough policy toward Cuba. The president will unveil the details tomorrow, but our correspondent Kevin Corke at the White House tonight already knows what the president will announce, and he's about to tell us. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey there, John. You're right about that. The president keeping a promise to revise Obama-era Cuba U.S. policy. The president really making some sweeping changes, in effect trying to get the regime down in Havana to loosen restrictions on things like religious freedom, access to the internet for the Cuban people, and a major new restriction on doing business with any entity that might benefit the Cuban military. All this, by the way, happening on a day when the president took to Twitter to criticize a report that suggests he is the subject of an obstruction of justice probe.
We want to keep jobs in America, and we want to train people and hire American workers to fill those jobs, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Hoping to keep the focus on his administration's jobs message, the president today signed an executive order to roughly double the $200 million in taxpayer money spent on apprenticeships and learn-to-earn programs.
Thank you very much, everybody.
But amid the smiles and handshakes, the president ignored questions about a bombshell in the Russia investigation. The Washington Post, citing unnamed sources, reports that the president is now the subject of an obstruction of justice investigation led by special counsel Robert Mueller. If true, it is a stunning setback for a president who previously hailed the fact that on 3 separate occasions, former FBI Director James Comey told him that he was not the subject of a probe. But just last week, Mr. Comey told Congress he believed he was fired in an effort to undermine the agency's investigation. The president today lashed out on Twitter. They made up a phony collusion with the Russian story, found 0 proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Nice. And he added, you're witnessing the single greatest witch hunt in American political history, led by some very bad and conflicted people. Hashtag Make America Great Again. But some Republican lawmakers caution the president's tone isn't exactly helpful or accurate.
It's not a witch hunt. No, I mean, I think that, he's got a job to do. We all understand that. And I think it's in everybody's best interest if we let him do his job and we do ours.
Mueller's probe does appear to be expanding from the singular question of did the Trump campaign collude with the Russians to now including possible obstruction. White House officials referred all questions about the probe to outside counsel, who in a statement called the FBI leak of information regarding the president outrageous, inexcusable, and illegal. This, as the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee in a private setting about his conversations with the president. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin seemed to take delight in all the attention, offering asylum to former FBI Director Comey should he find himself at odds with the Trump White House. Just a bit of trolling there by Vladimir Putin. Now, I mentioned in the piece there, John, the president was on Twitter earlier today complaining about the probe. Well, he was back on Twitter tonight. Let me share just one of his latest tweets comparing his obstruction of justice probe, if you want to call it that, with one that may have happened for the person he beat to win the presidency. He said this about, and I'm using his words now, Crooked H, as in Crooked Hillary, quote, Crooked H destroyed phones with a hammer, bleached emails, and had her husband meet with the AG days before she was cleared, and they talk about obstruction? By the way, the team for Robert Mueller says they don't have any comment about that leak that led to that Washington Post story, John. I'm sure they don't. Hey, some other news there at the White House complex. The vice president has hired an outside attorney in connection with the Russia investigation. Yeah, you're right about that. Mike Pence, the vice president, hiring Richard Cullen from a pretty big firm here, McGuire Woods, to be his outside counsel. That process, by the way, John, took several weeks to wrap up. And I think this is an important note. This will not involve the use of taxpayer money. John? All right, Kevin, safe travels tonight. You're headed to Florida. Yes, sir. For the big Cuba announcement tomorrow. Thanks, Kevin. President Trump and the First Lady were on hand today for a special event at the Supreme Court. It was the investiture ceremony for new Justice Neil Gorsuch, the president's nominee for the High Court, who was first sworn in back in April. There was said to be no mention of the president's travel ban, which is under consideration by the justices. The jury in the Bill Cosby sexual assault trial is still deliberating tonight after telling the judge earlier in the day they cannot come to a unanimous consensus on any of the counts. Cosby is charged with drugging and violating a woman at a suburban Philadelphia home back in 2004. Dozens of women have come forward to accuse Cosby of similar actions, but this is the only case to result in criminal charges. Stocks were down today. The Dow lost 15 points. The S&P 500 dropped 5, and the NASDAQ was off 29. British Prime Minister Theresa May is ordering a full public inquiry into yesterday's deadly fire in West London. At least 17 people died when the blaze raced through a high-rise apartment building housing as many as 600 people. Firefighters and search crews are carefully going through the structure. Many people are still missing, including entire families. The Navy still does not have any answers about potentially fatal problems in both its training aircraft and its vaunted F-18 fighter jet. The Navy ordered a pause in training while it conducts a review. That review, released today, says finding a solution to the problem has, quote, proven elusive. In other words, there's still no fix. Former Navy F-18 pilot Leah Gabriel spoke with Admiral Bill Moran, who ordered the review.
Pilots told me that they were more concerned about a failure in their basic life support system that we're talking about killing them than they are concerned about being shot down by enemy fire. What do you make of those suggestions?
Well, I think
it's important for all of us in leadership positions to understand when we hear those sorts of things, there's a cry for, hey, are you listening to me?
Admiral Moran says the Navy is listening and taking action with a, quote, unconstrained resource approach.
We've got a lot of people converging and swarming on a problem that we're gonna find ways to mitigate that risk and ultimately fix it.
When systems in both the F-18 Hornet and the T-45 don't provide clean, breathable air to air crew, they may become dizzy, euphoric, or even pass out while flying. Reports of those kinds of incidents have been on the rise. In fact, the Navy is using a simulator that trains pilots to recognize if they become impaired and then manually activate their emergency oxygen supply. I tried it myself.
It was a little bit dizzy, and then very quick onset. It felt like a sudden head rush that wouldn't relent.
To address the issues, the Navy has already been increasing system inspections and improving maintenance. And based on the 65-page review, it plans to establish a dedicated organization to lead the efforts while continuing to investigate what's causing the problems and redesigning some key systems. But Admiral Moran says finding a clear fix won't be easy.
An elusive solution here is just a reflection of how complex the system is by itself. So it's not a simple system. It's not one single thing. It could be a combination or a series of things that cause the problem.
The pilots I spoke to are brave. Are they taking risks that they should not have to take?
We don't want them to take any unnecessary risk. The system, the aircraft, ought to operate the way it was designed to operate. And it's up to us to figure out how to get that airplane back to that level of performance.
In the case of a system failure, pilots have to manually activate emergency oxygen even if they're impaired. Admiral Moran says an automatic system is the goal. John?
Our fighter pilot in residence, Leah Gabriel, tonight. Leah, thanks so much. A U.S. Navy sailor thought to be lost at sea has been found aboard his ship. Pentagon officials say Peter Mims was hiding in one of the engine rooms aboard the guided missile cruiser USS Shiloh. American and Japanese ships searched thousands of square miles of the ocean over the past week looking for Mims. He will be transferred to another ship for medical and psychological evaluation. The day after a shooting that could have been a massacre, there are calls for unity, but will they hold up?
Forget that words matter and can become seeds that will bring a bitter harvest.
Today, it's the anti-Trump fervor that inspires people in social media, in Hollywood.
I would argue that the president has unleashed is partially, again, not in any way totally, but partially to blame for demons that have been unleashed.
Calls for a rhetorical ceasefire in the wake of yesterday's shooting in Alexandria, Virginia, and more calls for unity. But how long will it last? Let's bring in our panel. Judge Andrew Napolitano is with us, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, editor-in-chief of LifeZette. Laura Ingraham and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. You know, it's not even like the shooting coverage lasted a day before the Washington Post came out with a breaking news story, Laura, yesterday that, oh, now the president is being investigated for potential obstruction of justice. It's like we can't stay on one thing very long without it coming back to political division.
5 anonymous sources in the Washington Post story indicating that the special counsel has interviewed members of the intelligence community, 5 people unauthorized to speak, so they spoke on the condition of anonymity. But I think what you saw today was nice. It was heartening. But I think some of the kumbaya mentality that we've heard over the last 24 hours does also kind of gloss over just how low we've gone. And I'd say from the Ferguson riots to Baltimore, the total lack of respect for the police, to Berkeley, to Middlebury, where someone like a Charles Murray is treated abysmally, where you justify burning cars, turning them over, writing the F word on the American flag. This is a type of carnage which is going to get worse unless both parties speak out against how it incites the already deranged among us. And
Judge,
it's disturbing.
Judge, we've seen calls for unity in the past, and they lasted maybe a couple of weeks after 9/11. How long do you expect this is going to
I agree with everything that Laura just said, and I don't think this call for unity will last much longer. I was just telling Mara that I really feel for and worry about Steve Scalise, and it just doesn't look good at this point. But whatever happens to him, I think they're going to be back in the pits, at each other's throats, fighting tooth and nail, using language which just sends the wrong signals to young people who regurgitate it on social media. So this is self-fulfilling and self-producing and self-regenerating. The concept of every hill is worth dying for and every battle is a battle to the death.
Yesterday, the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi was saying, I identify with the eloquent remarks of the Speaker of the House. Listen to what she said today.
I think that the comments made by my Republican colleagues are outrageous, beneath the dignity of the job that they hold, beneath the dignity of the respect that we would like Congress to command. How dare they say such a thing? How dare they?
She was reacting to some of the comments by some Republicans that the Democrats need to tone down some of the rhetoric that they're using. I mean, Mara, can these two stop warring with each other?
Well, look, they should fight tooth and nail over policy. That's what we expect. But the blaming each other and using rhetoric that incites violence has to stop. And both parties have a lot to do with it. There's not one party that's guilty here. If Republicans are blaming Democrats for this incident, that's just as bad as Democrats blaming Republicans for some other violent incident. I think it can change. It just takes political will. And everything that we saw in the last 24 to 48 hours was pretty good. You know, you had the president, who was very quick often to be divisive, because that's a political strategy that works for him. He didn't do that here. So let's just see what happens as we go forward in the next couple of days.
You know, in the middle of all of this, Charles, an editorial in the New York Times, which again repeated the much discredited meme that a Sarah Palin ad was responsible for Gabby Gifford's shooting. So even the media is in on this game, too, not just the political side.
No, I agree. I mean, that editorial this morning repeating that was not only scandalous, but unbelievable, because that's a 6-year-old story that's been debunked within 3 days, when it turned out that it had nothing at all to do with her, and the man who did the shooting was a paranoid schizophrenic. I think the problem here is it's twofold. It's not just the style, but it's also the objectives. There's now a style in our politics where the ad hominem is the norm, and that's the wrong. I mean, people ought to fight over policy, but once you begin to question the motives, the patriotism of your opponent, you've gone too far. But the worst thing, and I think this is overlooked, the two parties, the two ideologies, you might say, speak about the politics in apocalyptic terms. If the other guy wins, it's the end of the republic. Nice. If the other guy wins, it's the end of the world. The man who did the shooting yesterday is a man who bought into that, quite literally. I mean, you can speak about hyperbolically, but when those are the stakes, when you say, unless we stop Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, the republic will not survive, then that justifies anything. That's the language, the ideology, the rationale of terrorists. The fate of the world hangs on this. And it's up to the leadership to say these are policies. This is not the fate of the republic.
And it happened again today in Georgia, the race for the 6th congressional district. And we know how rancorous that has been. Today, some suspicious packages were delivered to Karen Handel's house and her neighbors. She had a statement saying, quote, this afternoon we had some suspicious packages delivered to our house and to our neighbors. The packages contained threatening letters and a suspicious substance. The police were quickly notified, and the street is now being blocked off. We will continue to coordinate with law enforcement as necessary. Laura, I read the letter. You certainly can't repeat it on television. Right. But the vitriol was just vile.
That is echoed by other congressmen who say that at these town hall meetings, it's not just raising your hand and asking a tough question, which I think is great. That's what those town hall meetings should be. But it's a level of viciousness and vitriol that we see on social media, but usually that's an anonymous thing. But now people are emboldened, and they're actually saying it in person. They're doing chalk drawings of people and their families on their driveways. So they wake up in the morning and they see a chalk drawing. But I think Charles is right. This apocalyptic language we hear on other cable networks, where these are supposedly very respected hosts who get up every morning and say, will our republic survive Donald Trump? In other words, the resistance is a physical resistance. If you believe your survival is at risk, it's almost, you have a moral duty to physically resist that, and I think this freak yesterday took it to heart.
Judge Amara, can we dial back from this? How do we dial back?
Well, I don't know. I mean, every time 5 or 6 or 10 members of Congress going to appear in public, do we have to have 50 cops with them?
It looks like it.
Are they going to start carrying weapons themselves? Many of them carry sidearms at home, and they're not allowed to carry them here in D.C.
There's a lot of things that can be done to dial back. First of all, how about members of Congress doing things together? This baseball game is an incredibly rare.
Doesn't fit the zero-sum game.
Doesn't fit the zero-sum game, but they can force themselves to do that because that's how things used to work a long time ago. The president can set a tone. I thought he did set the tone yesterday. He can keep it up. He doesn't have to demonize his enemies. And every single person in a position of leadership can conduct themselves with restraint. And they know, every member of leadership privately